One of the biggest topics for modern feminism today is on women's unpaid labor. That is, the work they do in the home, for their kids, for their husbands, for their community. Should they be getting paid for that labor, or should they at least be getting more public recognition? While I think this is a really valuable topic to talk about, I think the way that it's being presented by feminists is missing a lot of the bigger picture. And that's what I want to talk about in today's video. But first, I'm Cameron. I'm a couples therapist, wife, and mother, and on this channel I talk about all things related to faith, marriage, and parenting. So first I want to read to you guys the post that was shared with me by a family member that actually inspired me to make this video in the first place. And it is talking about the work of Susan Sontag. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. I'm sorry to anyone who likes her if I mispronounced her name. But it is about this topic on unpaid labor that women traditionally do. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it to you so you have a bit of the background on what I'm talking about here. Susan Sontag named a truth most people pretend not to see. Society is built on the work women do for free and the recognition men collect without effort. From the moment girls are taught to help, nurture, organize, soothe, and sacrifice, a system is already shaping their future. Women raise children, manage households, carry emotional labor, mediate conflicts, support partners, and keep entire communities functioning. None of this appears on paychecks, none of it shows up in job titles, yet without it, daily life would collapse. At the same time, women's ideas, leadership, and achievements have been credited to men for centuries. Scientific breakthroughs, activism, political strategy, workplace innovation, creative work, and emotional intelligence have often been absorbed into someone else's story. The pattern is simple. Women do the work, men get the applause. Even today, women are told that hard work will be rewarded. But the world often rewards visibility, not effort. And too often, men are positioned to be seen, while women are positioned to support. Sontag's quote forces a reckoning. Her quote is, "Society survives on the unpaid labor of women and the unclaimed credit of men." And then the post continues, "The world functions because of women. The world celebrates because of men. Change begins when we stop accepting that arrangement as normal and start naming it for what it is, a theft of labor, a theft of credit, and a theft of truth." So first off, before jumping into what I think might be wrong with this viewpoint, what's right about it is definitely that it highlights well the unpaid labor that women do, what we do behind the scenes, what we are not getting paid for financially, what we often don't get public recognition for. So that's part of why I wanted to read this post to you, is that it really does a good job of emphasizing the ways that women are completely integral to society and what we are doing that doesn't receive much recognition but is incredibly important. However, where I think this idea from the feminist movement goes wrong when it comes to unpaid labor performed by women, first of all, is this emphasis on public recognition. My first question when I read this post was, why are we so focused on being publicly recognized for the work that we do behind closed doors or in our small, tight-knit communities, things that are sort of intrinsically valuable? And I think one really big concern that I had while reading this is if we are making this huge push towards public recognition, that we are going to cross over a line that psychologists have recognized for decades, that extrinsic reward has the tendency to cannibalize intrinsic motivation. And by that I mean, if something is intrinsically motivating, like being a mom, so for example, breastfeeding is very intrinsically rewarding and motivating for a lot of women for a lot of reasons. Number one, we love our babies. We want them to be healthy. Number two, our bodies are designed to breastfeed. And so we get a lot of hormonal releases like dopamine and oxytocin that really bond us to our child when we breastfeed. If we were to start paying women to breastfeed, for example, there's a really good chance that intrinsic motivation, that intrinsic reward would decrease. So you can think about it sort of like filling a cup. If a cup is totally filled with intrinsic value and intrinsic reward, as soon as you introduce an external reward, it's actually going to diminish the amount of the cup that's filled by the intrinsic reward, that we can only be so rewarded. And so the extrinsic reward will come in and cannibalize or overtake the intrinsic reward. And the issue there, so some people might say, oh, that's not a big deal. You're still going to be breastfeeding. At least now you're getting paid for it and you can, feed your family better. Your husband doesn't have to work as much or whatever the argument is. But the problem is that when we start to put a price on things that are intrinsically valuable, things that are priceless, if we put a price on them, we ultimately end up undervaluing them. So that this is an argument in the Catholic Church, and then a lot of other religious circles that have relics or, priceless pieces of art or, fine jewelry or things like that. If you're not religious, you can think about this sort of from the fine art and fine jewelry and, national monuments perspective, that what price would you put on the White House, for example? What price would you put on an ancient work of art? When you put a price on things, when you put a monetary price on things, or even a price on things from a public recognition perspective, it always ends up undervaluing them because they are inherently, intrinsically valuable in a way that goes above and beyond money. It goes above and beyond the recognition. And so when we try to equate it to something like a sandwich, that, maybe you put a price on a Jimmy John's sandwich of $10, that's reasonable. It's not undervaluing the sandwich because it's not that valuable to begin with. It's just to, satiate your hunger in the moment. And so maybe $10 is worth the trick. But a priceless piece of art, a piece of the cross that Jesus hung on as a relic, love, that's another one that it really boils down to the things that intrinsically motivate us to care for our children, to care for our husbands, to care for our community, is things like love and compassion and, our attention to detail and our gentleness, all these feminine virtues that as soon as we start wanting recognition for those invaluable things, it cheapens them. So I think that's the first and probably the biggest issue here, is that as soon as we start trying to put a price on women's unpaid labor, similar to how we would put a price on a man's or a woman's paid labor in work, as soon as we try to say, okay, how much is it worth it to be a mom? Should I be making $50,000 a year, 75, 100? No matter what monetary value or amount of public recognition you put on motherhood, for example, it's never going to be enough. You cannot overvalue motherhood. You can only undervalue it when you try to compare it to material success or gain. The second point here is that this unpaid labor actually does reap enormous fruits and benefits. They just usually don't happen right away. And so the way that, let's compare it again to the workforce. So let's say you do a 9-to-5 job and you get a paycheck twice a month or every other week, for example. So every other week, you are seeing the monetary benefit and the monetary reward of your work. So you put in the 40 hours a week for 2 weeks and then you get a paycheck. It's very, transactional. It's very immediate compared to motherhood or even marriage, where the work you put in today, you are going to see some benefits when your children are learning or when your husband is joyful and you guys are spending quality family time together. But the real benefits, the real pay, I would say, the real fruits of your labor, so to speak, you don't see until your kids are grown. You don't see it until you've spent 30 years with your spouse and have a beautiful marriage to look back on. You don't see until your kids start families of their own. They find their own spouse or they become their own person who is just this incredible, well-adjusted, beautiful soul who's going to make the world a better place. That's when you see the fruits in their, full blossoming of all the work that you put in for all those years of cleaning up poopy diapers and, helping your toddler through tantrums and pregnancy and breastfeeding and all of the different ages of all the way through grade school. And then you're helping them as young adults. I mean, I have 2 kids under 2 right now, so I am nowhere near this point of seeing all of the fruits of the labor that I have now in the future. But, God willing, one day I'm going to see all of our children grow up into these just incredible people. And I'm going to be able to say that I was a part of that. That if we are looking for compensation now in the moment for what we do as women, I think it not only cheapens the intrinsic value of this work that we do now, but it definitely cheapens what the real payoff is in the future when we see how much good we've done for other people, and that because of that good, and that work and sacrifice that we did for them now, that they end up being much better off in the future. And lastly, if you're religious like me, a really big point here, if we read this post back, it talks about how the work that we do behind the scenes as women really facilitates what men can do out in public, what they can get paid for, what they can be publicly recognized and celebrated for. That this is seen as a bad thing. But if you are Christian, then your worldview is often totally countercultural, meaning it's the complete opposite of what culture tells us is right. And this is a perfect example that the virtue of humility is so huge in the Christian faith, that Jesus and his mother and Saint Joseph and every saint that we've ever seen throughout history is just immensely humble. God himself was humble enough to be born into the world, not just as a baby, but a baby born to poor parents in a barn. He was literally born in a barn, and for the rest of his life, up into his death, where he was killed, murdered in the most humiliating way possible at the time on the cross, his entire life is just a testament to the value of humility. So if we read this post back through a Christian lens, for those of you that are trying to live, as better Christian wives and moms, it really can be read as we are at an advantage as women, that our husbands go out into the world and risk being caught up in this public recognition and risk their work being done only for the paycheck, while we know at home we can do good works unseen. We can do things behind the scenes that are so impactful, and we know they're impactful, and we know that God is pleased with us because we are doing it humbly. That's really, motherhood and wifehood are just such incredible opportunities to be humble and to become more like Christ. And honestly, I have a tough time not viewing this post that way and not viewing this conversation that way, of saying we need to help make sure our husbands, have their egos in check, that they don't get this opportunity to be so unseen and to be so humble, that we need to help them make sure that they have those opportunities too, that the sacrifice that they're making so that we can practice these Christian virtues and hopefully become saints one day is just incredible. And so I just want to wrap up this video with a quote that has been really inspiring to me recently by St. Francis Xavier Cabrini. And I think it's really good addition to this conversation about unpaid labor for women. So if you ever feel yourself getting frustrated that you're not being recognized for all your efforts, especially work done in the home or for your husband or in your community, that just remember that, at least this is what I'm trying to remind myself, that this work that isn't seen by other people is actually more pleasing to God. And oftentimes it's more impactful. It's a bigger deal. It ends up doing more good than the work that does get seen out in the world. So here's the quote. "We must pray without tiring, for the salvation of mankind does not depend on material success, nor on sciences that crowd the intellect. Neither does it depend on arms and human industries, but on Jesus alone." So this takes us to an even further step, that the work we do matters, but it doesn't matter as much as Jesus' work that he's already done and that he continues to do. And prayer is the perfect example of this. It's the most humble thing we can do, is to pray in the privacy of our own homes. Nobody sees that. Nobody hears that except for us and God. So, and the power of prayer is incredible. So the more we pray, the more good gets brought into the world, the more God is moving in and through us. And so if prayer is so powerful and it is incredibly humble, then we can also believe that the work that we're doing, whether other people see it or not, is also incredibly powerful. And we will see the rewards of it someday. Probably not today, maybe not 10 years from now, but certainly down the line, and God sees it every single day. Okay guys, that's all I've got for you today. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this, and also leave a comment on your thoughts about unpaid labor, especially when it has to do with the women, if you think it's fair or not, if you think we need to change how things are or not. I love to read your comments. Whether you agree with me or not, it really helps me learn and grow, and it really serves the mission of helping all of us women get to heaven, as holy wives and mothers. Until next time, I'm Cameron, and thanks for watching.